I'm not coming back. I've met someone better, and I've already moved your things to storage. I'm staring at my phone in the kitchen of our Des Moines home at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. My wife, Sarah, was supposed to be on day 4 of a girl's trip to Napa Valley. The text came with a screenshot that made my blood run cold. Bank transfer, $118,000. Moved from our joint savings to her personal account. 15 years of marriage. Ended in 2 sentences and a bank screenshot. But here's what Sarah didn't know. I'm not just some boring accountant she could manipulate and discard. I'm a forensic accountant who specializes in financial fraud investigations. And I've been quietly preparing for this exact moment for 5 years. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, or if you've wondered what happens when someone underestimates the wrong person, you're going to want to stay with me for every single detail of this story. Because what Sarah thought was her perfect escape plan was actually about to become the biggest mistake of her life. Let me take you back to the beginning, because understanding how we got here is crucial to understanding why what happened next was so devastating for Sarah. I met Sarah Mitchell at a charity fundraiser 7 years ago. I was 41, recently divorced from a brief first marriage, and completely focused on building my forensic accounting practice. Sarah was 35, stunning, charismatic, and running a small but successful interior design business. What attracted me to Sarah wasn't just her beauty, though she was breathtaking. It was her ambition, her drive, her apparent independence. She seemed like someone who understood the value of hard work and building something meaningful. Our courtship was a whirlwind. She was interested in my work, asking thoughtful questions about my cases, seeming genuinely impressed by the complexity of financial investigations. When I told her about tracking down millions in hidden assets for divorce cases, she'd lean in with fascination. "You're like a financial detective," she'd say, eyes bright with what I thought was admiration. "You can find money anywhere, can't you?" I should have paid more attention to the way she phrased that question. We married after 18 months of dating. Sarah's business was struggling, and I helped her restructure her debts and expand into higher-end residential projects. When she wanted to lease a larger showroom space, I co-signed the loan. When she needed a new truck for deliveries, I happily put it in both our names. "We're partners now," she'd say, snuggling up to me as I signed another document. "What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine." For the first few years, it felt like a true partnership. Sarah's business grew steadily with my financial backing and business advice. We bought our dream house in West Des Moines, a beautiful colonial with enough space for the family we talked about having someday. But then things started to shift. Sarah became increasingly interested in fitness and wellness. She joined an expensive gym, started taking personal training sessions, and began following wellness influencers on social media. I supported this completely. I wanted her to be happy and healthy. What I didn't realize was that her wellness journey was becoming something else entirely. The first red flag was subtle. Sarah started talking about a trainer named Marcus who was transforming her relationship with her body. She'd come home from workouts glowing, energized in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Marcus says I have incredible potential," she'd tell me over dinner. "He thinks I could even compete in fitness competitions." I encouraged her, even when the training sessions became more frequent and more expensive. Even when she started traveling to wellness retreats and fitness conventions. Even when she began posting workout videos on Instagram and building a following. "You wouldn't understand the community aspect," she'd say when I asked about her trips. "It's not just about fitness. It's about personal transformation and female empowerment." The second red flag was financial. Our joint credit card bills started showing charges I didn't recognize. Expensive athletic wear, supplements, professional photography sessions for her social media content. When I asked about it, Sarah became defensive. "I'm building a brand," she'd say. "This is an investment in our future. Once I get enough followers, I can monetize this. We could be looking at 6 figures annually from sponsorships alone." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to support her dreams. So I increased our credit limits and said nothing when our monthly expenses nearly doubled. The third red flag was the most obvious, but I was too deep in denial to see it clearly. Sarah stopped wanting to spend time with me. Our conversations became surface level. She was always on her phone, always planning the next trip or event or photo shoot. We went from being partners to being roommates to being strangers sharing a mortgage, but I still didn't suspect what was really happening. Not until 3 years ago, when my father made a comment that stopped me cold. We were working on his deck one Saturday, and Sarah had called to say she'd be late coming home from the gym again. "Son," my dad said, setting down his hammer and looking at me directly, "I need to say something, and I hope you'll hear it with love." I stopped what I was doing. "I've watched Sarah spend more of your money in 5 years than most people see in a lifetime. The clothes, the trips, the business expenses. And I've watched you work longer hours to fund it all." My initial reaction was defensive. "Dad, Sarah's building something important. Her Instagram has over 50,000 followers now. And how much money has that actually brought in?" I couldn't answer because I didn't know. I'd never asked Sarah to show me the revenue from her social media work. "Son, just make sure she values what you do to earn it. Make sure she values you." That night, I asked Sarah to show me her business financials. Her response was immediate and sharp. "I can't believe you don't trust me. After everything I built, everything I've sacrificed for us, you want to audit me like I'm some kind of criminal?" The fight that followed was our worst ever. Sarah accused me of being controlling, unsupportive, jealous of her success. I backed down, apologized, and promised to be more supportive, but my father's words haunted me. That weekend, while Sarah was at another wellness retreat, I did something I'd never done before. I opened a separate bank account, not to hide money from Sarah, just to have a small emergency fund that was mine alone. A safety net in case something happened to my business or if we hit financial trouble. What started as a $5,000 emergency fund became something much more significant as I began to notice other things. Sarah's business income was declining, but her expenses were increasing. She was using our joint credit cards for personal purchases and categorizing them as business expenses. She was taking cash advances and making transfers that she couldn't adequately explain. More troubling, I discovered that Sarah had been researching my assets. I found browser history on our shared computer showing searches for how to find hidden bank accounts and divorce asset discovery laws in Iowa. That's when I realized I wasn't paranoid. I was being studied. Sarah was preparing for something, and it wasn't growing old together. So I started preparing too. Over the next 2 years, I quietly began what I called my contingency plan. I wasn't planning to leave Sarah. I was planning to protect myself in case she left me. My forensic accounting background gave me advantages most people don't have. I understood asset protection, legal structures, and financial privacy in ways that can only come from years of investigating hidden wealth. First, I established 2 limited liability companies. Kessler Financial Consultant LLC would handle my primary business income, while Kessler Investment Holdings LLC would manage my growing portfolio investments and assets. I moved my business operations through these entities, creating legitimate but complex paper trails that would take a skilled attorney months to fully unravel. Not because I was hiding anything illegal. Everything was completely above board and properly documented. But because complexity creates protection, I diversified my investments across multiple asset classes and jurisdictions. Real estate in Colorado, tech stocks, cryptocurrency portfolios. A portion of my father's inheritance went into offshore accounts for international consulting clients, perfectly legal for my business model, but effectively invisible to casual inspection. Sarah knew about our joint checking and savings accounts, our mortgage, and my primary business income. What she didn't know was that represented maybe 30% of our actual financial picture. I also began documenting everything, every unusual expense Sarah made, every inconsistency in her explanations, every time she came home late with new stories about where she'd been. I installed discrete monitoring software on our whole network. Again, completely legal since I owned the network and it was protecting my business data. What I discovered confirmed my worst fears. Sarah was in constant communication with Marcus, her trainer. But their conversations weren't about fitness routines or meal plans. They were planning a future together, messages about apartments they could share, discussions about the best way to extract maximum value from her marriage, research into my business assets and how to access them. The most damning evidence came from a conversation I recorded legally in Iowa. Since I was a party to the conversation, when Sarah thought I was out of town for a client meeting, I'd actually returned early and heard her on the phone in our living room. "No, he has no idea," she was saying. "Leonard thinks I'm just some housewife playing around with Instagram. He doesn't know I've been planning this for over a year. The business is basically worthless now," she continued. "But the joint accounts have over 100,000, and I've been documenting all his income for the divorce filing. Plus he'll have to pay alimony, probably $3,000 a month minimum. He's so predictable, Marcus. He'll be devastated and desperate to win me back. That's when we negotiate the real settlement." I stood in my own hallway, listening to my wife of 12 years plan my financial destruction with her lover, and something inside me went completely cold. Not angry, not hurt, just cold and calculating. That night, I finalized the most important part of my contingency plan, working with my brother Jake, who specialized in digital security. We created what we called the nuclear option, a series of financial moves that could be triggered with a single phone call, protecting my assets and exposing Sarah's fraud simultaneously. We identified every account Sarah had access to, every piece of financial information she possessed, and every legal vulnerability in her planned betrayal. Most importantly, we discovered that Sarah had been forging my signature on financial documents, credit applications using our joint assets as collateral, business loans for Marcus's personal training studio that listed me as a co-guarantor without my knowledge. She'd been building a web of financial obligations that would legally make me responsible for her lover's business debts. Sarah thought she was being clever, using her access to our financial information to create a safety net for her new life. What she didn't realize was that forgery and financial fraud leave paper trails that someone with my expertise could follow anywhere. The final piece of the contingency plan was emotional preparation. I had to accept that my marriage was over, not because I wanted it to end, but because Sarah had already ended it. She was just waiting for the right moment to make it official. I spent months in therapy, working through the grief and betrayal. My therapist helped me understand that loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to destroy you. That protecting yourself from fraud isn't revenge. It's self-preservation. By the time Sarah sent that text from Napa Valley, I had already mourned our marriage. I had already processed the betrayal. I had already prepared for every possible scenario. What Sarah thought would be a surprise attack was actually the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment when all her careful planning would collide with 5 years of my more careful planning. The morning after Sarah's text, I woke up at 5:30 a.m., my normal time. I made coffee, checked the weather, and read the news just like any other day. Habits are important during a crisis. They keep you grounded when everything else is falling apart. At exactly 7 a.m., I called my brother Jake. "It's time," I said simply. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Once we do this, there's no going back." She made her choice. Now I'm making mine. The first step was protecting our joint assets. Using my banking relationships and documented evidence of unauthorized transfers, I filed fraud alerts on every account Sarah had access. The $118,000 transfer was immediately flagged and frozen pending investigation. Next, I triggered automatic notifications to all our credit cards and loan providers about potential identity theft. Every account that Sarah could access was immediately secured with new authentication requirements. Then came the most satisfying part. I provided documented evidence to the bank of Sarah's forged signatures on Marcus's business loans. Loans that made me liable for over $200,000 in debt I'd never agreed to. Bank fraud investigators work fast when they have clear evidence and a cooperative victim. By 10 a.m., they had already begun freezing Marcus's business accounts and flagging the loans for criminal investigation. At 10:15, my attorney filed for divorce, citing adultery, financial fraud, and identity theft. We included every document I gathered over 2 years, every recorded conversation, every piece of evidence showing premeditation. By noon, Sarah's perfect plan was completely unraveling. My phone started ringing at 12:30. Sarah's name on the caller ID over and over. I let it go to voicemail. Leonard, what did you do? My cards aren't working, and the bank says our accounts are frozen. This has to be some kind of mistake. Call me back immediately. The next call came an hour later, voice higher and more panicked. Leonard, I know you're angry, but this is insane. You can't just freeze everything. I need access to our money. Marcus says the bank called about his loans too. What is happening? The third call was pure rage. You son of a bitch. I know you're doing this to punish me. Well, congratulations, you've made your point. Now fix it, or I'm coming home and we're going. To settle this face-to-face, I saved all the voicemails. Evidence of her acknowledgement that she'd accessed accounts without authorization and her awareness of Marcus's fraudulent loans. That evening, I drove to the storage unit Sarah had mentioned in her text. Using the access code she'd helpfully provided, I retrieved my belongings, or what she'd chosen to leave me. She'd taken our wedding photos, my father's watch, and several family heirlooms. But she'd left my clothes, my books, and most importantly, my business files. Sarah had no idea which of my possessions were actually valuable. The missing watch bothered me most. My father had given it to me on my wedding day, with a note about time being the most precious gift we can give someone. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I loaded boxes into my truck, my phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Kessler? This is Detective Rodriguez with Des Moines PD. We've received a report of financial elder abuse and fraud. Could you come in for an interview? I almost laughed. Sarah was trying to claim I was financially abusing her. Detective, I'm a licensed forensic accountant with full documentation of every transaction in question. I'd be happy to provide you with evidence of actual fraud committed against me. The conversation was brief. Detective Rodriguez quickly realized who the real victim was. 2 days later, Sarah appeared at my office. I was in a meeting with a client when my assistant buzzed in. Leonard, your wife is here. She says it's urgent. I excused myself and walked to the lobby. Sarah stood there in designer workout clothes, hair perfectly styled, looking like she'd stepped out of a fitness magazine. The image of success and confidence, but her eyes told a different story. Dark circles, stress lines, the look of someone who hadn't slept in days. Leonard, she said, forcing a smile. There's been a huge misunderstanding with the bank. All our accounts are frozen, and they're saying something about fraud. You need to call them and fix this. I looked at her calmly. There's no misunderstanding. Sarah, the bank flagged unauthorized transfers from our joint account. They're also investigating forged signatures on loan documents. Her smile faltered. What are you talking about? What loan documents? The ones you signed on my behalf to secure Marcus's business loans, using our marital assets as collateral, without my knowledge or consent. The color drained from her face. That's not. Marcus said it was just standard paperwork. Marcus lied to you, just like you lied to me. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Leonard, please. I made a mistake. I know I hurt you, but we can work this out. I'll come home. We'll go to counseling. Just please stop this. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked so small, so desperate. This wasn't the confident woman who'd been planning my destruction for 2 years. Sarah, you texted me that you found someone better and already moved my things out. You emptied our savings account. You committed fraud using my identity. There's nothing to work out. I was confused, she said quickly. Marcus convinced me that we weren't happy, that I deserved better. But I realize now that was wrong. You're my husband. I want to fight for us. I studied her face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse. All I saw was panic and calculation. If you want to fight for something, I said quietly, fight the criminal charges that are coming, because that's out of my hands now. Her mask finally slipped completely. You bastard. You planned this whole thing. You set me up. No, Sarah. You set yourself up. I just protected myself from the consequences of your choices. She left without another word. Through the lobby windows, I watched her sit in her car. For nearly 10 minutes, probably calling Marcus, probably trying to figure out what to do next. I felt no satisfaction in her pain. Just a deep sadness for what we could have been if she'd chosen differently. 3 days after Sarah's office visit, Marcus showed up at my house. It was Sunday morning, and I was working in my garden, something I started doing to manage stress. There's something therapeutic about nurturing growth after experiencing so much destruction. Marcus pulled up in a flashy red Mustang convertible, the kind of car that screams, "Look at me." He was everything I'd expected. Tall, tan, muscular. In the artificial way that comes from constant gym work rather than actual labor. He walked up to my front porch with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "Leonard, right?" he said, flashing a practiced smile. "I'm Marcus. I think we need to talk." I set down my gardening tools and stood up slowly. "About what?" "About Sarah. About this whole misunderstanding with the banks and the lawyers. Look, I know you're hurt, but you're taking this too far." I almost admired his audacity. "Taking what too far? Come on, man. Sarah made a mistake, but she loves you. She's been crying for days, talking about how she threw away the best thing in her life. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive her?" I looked at this man who'd been planning to steal my wife and my money, now standing on my porch asking for mercy. "Marcus, do you know what I do for a living?" He shrugged. "Sarah said something about accounting. Numbers and spreadsheets, right? I'm a forensic accountant. I investigate financial fraud for law enforcement agencies, divorce attorneys, and federal prosecutors. I've traced hidden assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I've helped send people to prison for financial crimes." His smile wavered slightly. "So when you and Sarah decided to forge my signature on your business loans, you picked the wrong person to defraud." Now his confidence cracked completely. "Look, those loans were just standard business documents. Sarah said she had authority to sign for both of you. Sarah lied to you. Just like she lied to me. The difference is, I have 2 years of documented evidence of her lies." "What do you have?" Marcus stepped back, finally understanding that he was out of his depth. "Those loans are your responsibility now," I continued. "Over $200,000 in business debt that you'll have to service without my assets backing them. The bank has already called them due." "But Sarah said you were wealthy." "She said the money wouldn't matter to you. Money's never been the issue, Marcus. Trust was the issue. And now you're about to learn an expensive lesson about trusting the wrong person." He left without another word. 2 hours later, Sarah called. "What did you say to Marcus?" she demanded. "He's talking about leaving town, abandoning everything we built together." I told him the truth about his financial situation, something you apparently forgot to mention. "Leonard, please, I'm begging you. End this. I'll sign whatever divorce papers you want. I'll take nothing. Just please don't destroy him." For the first time since this all began, Sarah sounded genuinely desperate. Not manipulative, not calculating, just broken. "Sarah, I'm not destroying Marcus. I'm simply no longer protecting him from the consequences of decisions he made. Just like I'm no longer protecting you. The next week, I received a call from my attorney with an update that surprised even me. Leonard, we've discovered something interesting. Sarah's been transferring money to Marcus for over 18 months, but not just from your joint accounts. She's been embezzling from her own business clients. I sat down hard. What do you mean? Her interior design business has been taking deposits from clients for projects, then using that money to fund Marcus's gym and their lifestyle. We're talking about over $150,000 in client funds that were never used for their intended purposes. I felt sick. How many clients? At least 12 families. People who trusted her with major home renovations, paid significant deposits, and never received the work they contracted for. This changed everything. Sarah hadn't just betrayed me, she'd been stealing from innocent families, people who trusted her with their homes and their money. There's more, my attorney continued. The state licensing board has been investigating complaints against her business for months. Non-completion of contracted work, failure to return deposits, using client funds for personal expenses. They want to interview you as a witness to her financial activities and spending patterns. I agreed immediately. This was no longer about my marriage or even my money. Sarah had been running a systematic fraud operation, using her legitimate business as a front to steal from families throughout central Iowa. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my mother. Leonard, how are you holding up? She asked gently. I thought I knew who I was married to, I said. But it turns out I didn't know Sarah at all. People can surprise us, Mom said. Sometimes in wonderful ways, sometimes in terrible ways. The question is what you do with that knowledge. I'm trying to do the right thing. But sometimes I wonder if I'm being vindictive. Son, protecting yourself from fraud isn't vindictive. Helping other victims get justice isn't vindictive. You didn't create this situation. You're just refusing to enable it. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house and thought about the 12 families Sarah had stolen from. Parents who'd saved for years to renovate their homes. Young couples starting their lives together. Retirees spending their fixed incomes on projects that would never be completed. Sarah hadn't just betrayed our marriage vows. She betrayed the trust of an entire community. The next morning, I called Detective Rodriguez. Detective, I have additional information about financial fraud involving my wife, but it's bigger than what we initially discussed. 6 weeks after Sarah's text ended our marriage, I sat in a conference room at the Polk County District Attorney's office, surrounded by files documenting 2 years of systematic fraud. Across from me sat Detective Rodriguez, Assistant District Attorney Michelle Chun, and representatives from the Iowa Department of Commerce who regulate interior design contractors. Mr. Kessler, Ada Chun began, your documentation has been extraordinary. In 20 years of prosecuting financial crimes, I've rarely seen such thorough evidence collection. On the table between us were printouts of bank transfers, copies of forged loan documents, recorded conversations, and client contracts showing Sarah's pattern of taking money without delivering services. The question now, Detective Rodriguez said, is whether you're willing to testify in criminal proceedings against your wife. I've been dreading this moment. Despite everything Sarah had done, she was still the woman I'd loved for 15 years. The thought of sending her to prison felt surreal. But then I thought about the family she defrauded. The Johnsons, who paid $15,000 for a kitchen renovation that never started. The Petersons, elderly retirees who'd given Sarah $8,000 to update their bathroom and were now facing financial hardship. Yes, I said, I'll testify. Ada Chun nodded. We're looking at multiple felony charges. Wire fraud, identity theft, contractor fraud, and money laundering. She could be facing 15 to 20 years. What about Marcus? I asked. He's cooperating fully, Detective Rodriguez replied. Claims he had no knowledge of the client fraud, thought all the money Sarah gave him came from her legitimate business income. We can't prove otherwise. So he gets away with it? Not exactly. The loan fraud still stands. He's facing civil liability for the business debts, and his cooperation agreement requires him to make restitution to the affected clients. He'll be financially ruined, but he won't do prison time. 3 days later, Sarah was arrested at the apartment she'd been sharing with Marcus in West Des Moines. The arrest was covered by local news, with footage of her being led away in handcuffs, while neighbors watched from their doorways. I felt no satisfaction watching the coverage. Just a profound sadness for how completely she destroyed her life. That evening, Sarah's mother called me for the first time since the separation. "Leonard," Helen said, her voice thick with tears, "I know you have every right to hate Sarah, but she's still my daughter. Is there anything that can be done?" Helen had always been kind to me. She'd welcomed me into their family, supported our marriage, never taken sides during our occasional disagreements. "Helen, I didn't press these charges. The state did, based on evidence of crimes against multiple victims. This isn't about our marriage anymore." "I know," she whispered. "I just ... She used to be such a good person. I don't understand how it got this bad. Neither do I." We talked for another hour. Helen told me about Sarah's childhood, her dreams of running her own business, her excitement when she first started the interior design company. "She called me last week," Helen said. "Told me everything. The affair, the money, all of it. No, she's lost you forever. But Leonard, she's scared about going to prison. She should be scared. What she did to those families was inexcusable. I know. I just wanted you to know that she's genuinely sorry. Not just sorry she got caught. Sorry for what she did." After Helen hung up, I sat in my kitchen and thought about forgiveness. Not legal forgiveness. Sarah would have to face the consequences of her crimes. But personal forgiveness, the kind that allows you to move forward without carrying poison in your heart. I wasn't ready for that yet. Maybe someday. 2 months later, I received a handwritten letter from Sarah. It was postmarked from the Polk County Jail, where she was being held pending trial. "Leonard, I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you throw this." Let her away without reading it. But I need to try to explain, not to excuse what I did, but so you might understand how I became someone I don't recognize. It started small. A deposit from a client that I used to cover a cash flow problem, intending to replace it the next week. But then there was another cash flow problem, and another, and suddenly I was robbing Peter to pay Paul constantly. Marcus didn't know about the client money. I told him it was business profits, that the interior design company was thriving. I wanted him to see me as successful, independent, worthy of the life we were planning. The affair began because I felt invisible in our marriage. Not because of anything you did wrong, but because I lost myself completely. I'd become someone whose only identity was being your wife, spending your money, living in your shadow. Marcus made me feel seen, admired, desired. When he talked about us building a life together, it felt like a chance to become the person I'd always wanted to be. I know now that what I felt wasn't love. It was the thrill of living a fantasy. And I destroyed real love, real partnership, real trust to chase that fantasy. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that losing you is the worst consequence of my choices. Worse than prison, worse than losing. Everything else. You were the best man I've ever known. And I threw that away for someone who abandoned me the moment things got difficult. Hope someday you'll find someone who deserves the love you have to give. Sarah. I read the letter 3 times, then put it in a drawer with our divorce papers. Part of me wanted to respond, to tell her that I understood the loneliness that led to her choices. But understanding doesn't erase consequences. And some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned. Sarah ultimately pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence of 8 years. She was ordered to pay full restitution to all affected clients, over $200,000, plus court costs and fines. Marcus left Iowa 2 weeks after Sarah's arrest. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to Florida and was working. as a personal trainer at a resort. The business loans he couldn't service destroyed his credit and forced him into bankruptcy. The 12 families Sarah defrauded all received full restitution through the state's Victim Compensation Fund and civil recovery actions against Sarah's remaining assets. It didn't undo the stress and hardship they'd endured, but at least they weren't left with complete financial losses. A year after Sarah's sentencing, I stood in the backyard of my new house, a modest craftsman bungalow in an established neighborhood, where people actually talked to their neighbors and kids played outside until dark. It was nothing like the showcase home Sarah and I had shared, with its perfect interior design and empty rooms that felt more like a magazine spread than a place where people actually lived. This house had character. Hardwood floors worn smooth by decades of family life. Built-in bookcases that held actual books instead of decorative objects. A kitchen with space for cooking real meals rather than just reheating takeout. I was planting tomatoes in the garden when my phone rang. My attorney's name on the caller ID. Leonard, I wanted to give you an update on the civil settlements. The last of Sarah's victims received their final restitution payments this week. That's good news. There's something else. Sarah's scheduled for early release next year. She's been a model prisoner, participated in financial responsibility classes, even helped other inmates with their GED studies. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Why are you telling me? Her attorney reached out. Sarah wants to write you a letter of apology as part of her rehabilitation program. She's not asking for contact or forgiveness, just permission to send you a letter acknowledging the full scope of harm she caused. I thought about it for a moment. Tell her attorney that one letter is fine, but make it clear that I won't be responding, and this doesn't open the door to ongoing communication. Understood. After I hung up, I sat on my back porch with a glass of iced tea and reflected on how much had changed in 18 months. The forensic accounting business had grown significantly. Word had spread through legal circles about my meticulous documentation of Sarah's fraud case, and attorneys throughout the Midwest were referring complex financial investigations to my firm. More importantly, I'd learned to trust my instincts. Again, the red flags I'd ignored in my marriage were now impossible to miss in my professional life. I could spot financial deception from a mile away, whether it was a cheating spouse hiding assets or a business partner embezzling funds. But it wasn't just about detecting fraud anymore. I'd started offering financial literacy workshops at community centers, teaching people how to protect themselves from scams and recognize the warning signs of financial abuse. The best defense against deception, I tell my audiences, is education and preparation. Know what questions to ask. Know what documents to review. Know what your rights are. Every workshop, I'd see faces in the crowd that reminded me of Sarah's. Victims, trusting people who've been taken advantage of by someone they believed in. If I could help even one person avoid that experience, then maybe some good could come from my own painful lessons. My personal life had also begun to heal. Though slowly, I'd started dating again 6 months earlier, something I never thought I'd be ready for. Her name was Lisa, and she was a high school English teacher who'd hired me to investigate suspected embezzlement at her school district. What attracted me to Lisa wasn't just her intelligence and humor, though she was brilliant and could make me laugh until my sides hurt. It was her complete lack of interest in my money. Our first real date was a hiking trip she'd suggested. She packed the lunch, drove her own car, and insisted on splitting the gas costs. When I offered to take her somewhere expensive for our second date, she laughed. Leonard, I make teacher money. If we're going to date, we need to find things to do that don't require me to spend my grocery budget on one meal. I found her directness refreshing after years of Sarah's indirect manipulation. When Lisa had an opinion, she stated it clearly. When she was upset about something, she said so directly. When she was happy, her smile was genuine and unguarded. We took things slowly. Lisa knew about my divorce and the circumstances surrounding it. It had been covered extensively in local news. But she never pressed for details I wasn't ready to share, and she never made me feel like damaged goods. "Everyone has baggage," she said one evening as we walked through Grays Lake Park. "The question is whether you've learned from it or whether you're still carrying it around like a weapon." That observation hit me harder than I expected. Was I still carrying my experience with Sarah like a weapon? Was I so focused on never being deceived again that I was missing out on genuine connection? It was a question I was still working through with my therapist, Dr. Martinez. I'd started seeing her right after Sarah's arrest, initially to deal with the trauma of discovering that my marriage had been built on lies. Healing from betrayal isn't just about protecting yourself from future harm. Dr. Martinez had explained during one of our sessions. It's about learning to trust your own judgment again, learning to be vulnerable again, but with wisdom. The letter from Sarah arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, almost exactly 2 years after she'd sent that first devastating text. This time, the handwriting was different. Less hurried, more careful. The paper was standard prison stationery, but the words were thoughtful and precise. "Leonard, I've been in prison for 14 months now, and I've had a lot of time to think about the person I became and the harm I caused. I want to start with the hardest truth. Everything I told you about why the affair was a lie. I wasn't lonely in our marriage. I wasn't feeling invisible or undervalued. You were a wonderful husband who supported my dreams, trusted me completely, and gave me every opportunity to build the life I said I wanted. I had the affair because I could, because the attention from Marcus made me feel powerful, because I enjoyed the thrill of deceiving you, because I liked having secrets and feeling like I was outsmarting everyone around me. Thought the client fraud started the same way. Not because I needed the money for business expenses, but because I wanted the money for fun expenses. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, designer clothes. I wanted to live like someone whose business was more successful than it actually was. I told myself I'd pay it back eventually. I told myself the clients would never know. I told myself I deserved nice things after working so hard to build my business. Every lie I told made the next lie easier. Every theft made the next theft feel justified. I became someone who could look you in the eye and lie about where I'd been, who I'd been with, and what I'd done with other people's money. I'm not writing this to make you feel sorry for me or to ask for forgiveness. I'm writing because you deserve to know the truth about who you were married to. You were married to someone who was capable of systematic deception and theft, someone who was willing to destroy multiple families' financial security for personal gratification, someone who forged your signature on legal documents without a moment's hesitation. The woman you fell in love with, the one who seemed ambitious and independent and worthy of your trust, she wasn't real. She was a performance I put on to get what I wanted. In prison, I've met other women who committed similar crimes. Most of them blame their circumstances, their upbringing, their victims. They see themselves as unfortunate rather than culpable. I refuse to do that. I made deliberate choices to deceive and steal. I planned your financial destruction methodically and enjoyed the process. I am responsible for every single consequence that followed. The other women here think I'm crazy for taking full responsibility. They say I should minimize my role, blame you for not paying enough attention, blame Marcus for leading me astray, blame my childhood for not preparing me for adult responsibilities. But I've learned something in these 14 months. Taking responsibility for your choices is the only way to have any hope of becoming someone different. I know now that I was never worthy of the love you gave me. I know that the 12 families I stole from trusted me with their dreams, and I turned their trust into a weapon against them. I know that Marcus didn't corrupt me. I corrupted him. I presented him with stolen money and told him it was legitimate business income. I convinced him to help me forge documents by telling him you give him permission. I destroyed his life by making him an unwitting accomplice to my crimes. When I get out of prison next year, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. Not to you. I know that bridge is permanently burned, but to the families, I hurt, and the community I betrayed. I hope you found happiness with someone who deserves it. I hope you've learned to trust again, because your capacity for love and partnership was never the problem in our marriage. The problem was me, and I take full responsibility for every moment of pain I caused. Sarah, I read the letter twice, then walked to my kitchen and poured a cup of coffee. Outside, spring was arriving in Iowa. The trees were budding, the grass was turning green, and my neighbors' kids were riding bikes in the alley behind our houses. Life was moving forward, as it always does. I felt empty, not sad, not angry, not relieved, just empty. For 2 years, I carried anger and betrayal like stones in my chest. I built walls around my heart and told myself it was wisdom. I'd approached every new relationship like a forensic investigation, looking for evidence of deception before allowing myself to feel anything genuine. Sarah's letter didn't change what she'd done or erase the harm she'd caused, but it did something I hadn't expected. It freed me from the need to keep hating her. I called Lisa that evening. "How was your day?" she asked, the same question she asked every evening when we talked. "I got a letter from Sarah," I said. Lisa was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel about that?" "I'm not sure yet, but I think I'm ready to stop looking backward." 6 months later, I was reviewing financial documents in my office when my assistant knocked on the door. "Leonard, there's someone here to see you." "Says it's important?" I looked up from the investment fraud case I was working on. "Do they have an appointment?" "No, but it's Sarah." My pen stopped moving across the page. After 3 years, she was finally out of prison. "Tell her I can give her 5 minutes." In the conference room, not my office. I walked down the hall and found Sarah sitting at the large oak table where I met with clients and attorneys. She looked different than I remembered, older, thinner, wearing a simple navy dress that looked like it came from a thrift store rather than a boutique. Her hair was shorter, styled practically rather than fashionably. No makeup, no jewelry except a plain watch. She looked like someone who'd learned to live without the luxuries she'd once considered necessities. "Hello, Leonard," she said quietly as I entered the room. "Sarah." I sat across from her, maintaining professional distance. "What can I do for you?" I wanted to thank you. That wasn't what I'd expected. Thank me for what? For documenting everything so thoroughly. For making sure all the victims got their money back. For forcing me to face the full consequences of what I'd done. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. I found none. The prosecutor told me that without your evidence, most of the fraud charges would have been impossible to prove. The families I stole from might never have gotten justice. That wasn't my intention, I said honestly. I was protecting myself. I know. But the result was justice for people who deserved it. That matters. We sat in silence for a moment. Through the conference room windows, I could see downtown Des Moines bustling with afternoon traffic. Normal people going about their normal lives, unaware that two people who'd once planned to grow old together were having their final conversation. "I have a job," Sarah said eventually, "at a nonprofit that helps people rebuild their credit after financial disasters. Ironic, I know, but they believe in second chances for people who genuinely change. Are you genuinely changed?" She considered the question carefully. "I think so. Prison gives you a lot of time to think about who you were and who you want to become. I know I'll never be the person I was before I started stealing and lying, but I hope I can become someone better than that person ever was. What do you want from me, Sarah? Nothing. I know you've moved on. I heard you're dating someone, a teacher. I hope she makes you happy." I didn't ask how she'd heard about Lisa. In a city the size of Des Moines, information travels. "I just wanted to close this chapter properly," Sarah continued. "To look you in the eye and take responsibility for what I did to you, to us, to everyone I hurt. You did that in your letter. Writing words is different from saying them to someone's face. Leonard, I destroyed our marriage through systematic deception and theft. I betrayed your trust, stole your money, and tried to make you liable for debts you never agreed to. I took 15 years of love and partnership and threw it away for the thrill of cheating. Her voice remained steady, but I could see tears forming. In her eyes, I stole from 12 families who trusted me with their homes and their dreams. I turned their trust into a weapon against them. Some of those people are still recovering financially from what I did. I know all this, Sarah, but I need to say it to you. I needed to look at the person I hurt most and acknowledge what I did without making excuses or asking for sympathy. I found myself believing her, not because I was naive, but because her words had the ring of hard-won truth. What happens now? I asked. I rebuild. Slowly, carefully, honestly. I make my restitution payments on time. I help other people avoid the mistakes I made. I try to become someone who adds value to the world instead of taking from it. She stood up, smoothing down her simple dress. I won't contact you again unless it's absolutely necessary. I know you have a good life now, and you deserve to live it without reminders of what I put you through. As she reached the door, I called out, "Sarah." She turned back. "I hope you succeed in rebuilding your life. Not for my sake, but for the sake of the person you're trying to become." She nodded once, then left. I sat in the conference room for another 10 minutes, processing the encounter. It felt like the end of something that had been unfinished for 3 years. That evening, I told Lisa about Sarah's visit over dinner at her apartment. "How do you feel about seeing her again?" Lisa asked, serving homemade lasagna that smelled like heaven. Relieved, I think. Like I can finally close that chapter. Completely. Do you believe she's really changed? I thought about it while chewing a bite of Lisa's excellent cooking. I think she's trying to change. Whether she succeeds long-term remains to be seen. But today, she seemed genuine. Lisa nodded. People can change if they really want to. It's just rare for someone to want it badly enough to do the work. After dinner, we sat on Lisa's porch swing, watching neighborhood kids play in the street as the summer evening cooled down. "Leonard," Lisa said quietly, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "We've been dating for almost a year. Now, I know we've been taking things slowly because of what you went through with Sarah." My heart rate picked up slightly. "Yes, I think I'm ready for us to move forward. Not because enough time has passed, but because I can see that you've healed. You trust me, and you trust yourself again." She was right. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped analyzing Lisa's every word for hidden meanings. I'd stopped looking for red flags and started simply enjoying her company. "I've been thinking the same thing," I admitted. "Good, because I love you, Leonard Kessler. Not your money, not your success, not what you can do for me. I love your integrity, your thoughtfulness, your dry sense of humor, and the way you make me feel safe without making me feel small. I love you too, Lisa, more than I thought I'd ever be able to love anyone again." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over our ordinary, wonderful neighborhood. 3 months later, I proposed to Lisa during a hiking trip to Starved Rock State Park in Illinois. Nothing fancy, just a simple ring and a heartfelt speech about wanting to build a real partnership based on honesty and mutual respect. She said yes immediately, then laughed and said, "I was starting to wonder if you were ever going to ask." We were married the following spring in a small ceremony at the community center where I taught financial literacy classes. Our wedding was everything my first wedding wasn't: intimate, authentic, focused on commitment rather than performance. Sarah sent a card, just a simple congratulations with no return address. Inside she'd written, "Wishing you both every happiness. You deserve all the love life has to offer." I showed the card to Lisa, who read it and nodded approvingly. "That was thoughtful of her. Are you okay with her sending it?" "Leonard, I'm not threatened by your past. Your experience with Sarah is part of what makes you the man I fell in love with. You learn hard lessons about trust and betrayal, and Those lessons made you someone who values honesty and genuine partnership. She was right. My painful experience with Sarah had taught me to recognize real love when I found it. 5 years later, I'm writing this on a Saturday morning in my home office, watching through the window as Lisa tends to our vegetable garden. She's wearing old jeans and one of my college t-shirts, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, completely absorbed in transplanting tomato seedlings in a few hours. We'll drive to my brother Jake's house for a family barbecue. Tomorrow we'll attend the high school graduation of one of Lisa's former students. Next week, I'll testify in another fraud case, helping ensure that someone else's betrayal doesn't go unpunished. It's an ordinary life, built on extraordinary trust. 5 years after Sarah's text ended my first marriage, I understand that the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's rebuilding something better from the ashes of what was destroyed. Sarah served her full sentence and has been working steadily at the nonprofit for 2 years. According to mutual acquaintances, she's become a passionate advocate for financial literacy education and has helped hundreds of people recover from scams and predatory lending. I don't know if her transformation is permanent, but I hope it is. Not for my sake, but for the sake of everyone whose life she touches going forward. Marcus eventually moved back to Iowa and opened a small personal training studio. He reached out to me once, wanting to apologize for his role in what happened. I told him that his cooperation with the investigation had been sufficient and that I wished him well in his legitimate business endeavors. The 12 families Sarah defrauded have all recovered financially, though some still struggle with the trust issues that come from being victimized by someone they believed in. I provided pro bono financial consulting to several of them, helping them protect themselves from future fraud. My forensic accounting practice has become one of the most respected in the Midwest. I've helped recover millions of dollars for fraud victims and have testified in dozens of criminal cases. The work is challenging and sometimes heartbreaking, but it's deeply satisfying to help people find justice. Most importantly, I've learned that protecting yourself from betrayal doesn't require building walls around your heart. It requires choosing the right person to trust, then trusting them completely while remaining vigilant about red flags. Lisa and I have that kind of partnership. We share everything: bank accounts, dreams, fears, and decision-making. But we do it from a foundation of mutual respect and absolute honesty. When Lisa wants to make a major purchase, she discusses it with me first. When I'm considering a new business investment, I get her input. When either of us is upset about something, we talk about it directly rather than letting resentment build. It's the kind of marriage I thought I had with Sarah. But this time it's real. Sometimes people ask me if I'm glad that Sarah's betrayal happened, since it led me to Lisa. That's too simple a question with too complex an answer. I'm not glad that 12 families were defrauded. I'm not glad that Sarah destroyed her life and spent 3 years in prison. I'm not glad that I spent 15 years loving someone who was systematically deceiving me. But I am glad that I learned the difference between real love and performance. I'm glad that I developed the skills to protect myself and others from financial predators. I'm glad that I found the strength to demand truth and respect in my relationships. Most of all, I'm glad that I learned the most important lesson from my experience with Sarah. The best revenge against betrayal isn't getting even. It's getting better. To anyone who's experienced betrayal by someone they trusted completely, I want you to know that healing is possible. Justice is possible. Love is possible again. But it requires you to do the hard work of learning from your experience without letting it define you. It requires you to protect yourself without shutting yourself off from connection. It requires you to trust again. But wisely. Sarah taught me what love isn't. It isn't manipulation, deception, or taking advantage of someone's trust. It isn't using someone's assets to fund your exit strategy or forging their signature on legal documents. Lisa taught me what love is. It's partnership, honesty, and mutual support. It's building something together that neither of you could create alone. It's choosing each other every day, not just when it's convenient. The difference between those two experiences is the difference between surviving and thriving. If you've been betrayed, survive first. Protect yourself, document everything. And don't let anyone convince you that seeking justice is vindictive. But don't stop there. Once you survive, learn to thrive again. Find someone worthy of your trust. Build something beautiful together. Create a life so fulfilling that your betrayer becomes just a chapter in your story, rather than the defining experience of your life. That's the ultimate revenge. Becoming happier without them than you ever were with them. And if you're reading this because you've been tempted to betray someone who trusts you, I want you to understand something. The person you're planning to deceive might be documenting everything. They might be more prepared than you think. They might have skills and resources you don't know about. More importantly, the temporary thrill of deception will never be worth the permanent consequences of being caught. The trust you destroy, the lives you damage, the person you become in. The process, none of it is worth whatever you think you'll gain. Choose honesty. Choose integrity. Choose to be someone worthy of the trust you've been given. Because the alternative, as Sarah learned the hard way, is losing everything that actually matters while gaining nothing that lasts. Life is too short to spend it deceiving the people who love you. It's too precious to waste on revenge fantasies and elaborate schemes. Spend it building something real with someone genuine. Spend it becoming the kind of person you want to trust with your own heart and dreams. That's not just the best revenge, it's the best life.